Everybody, welcome to another video. This is marathon number 90. Welcome to marathon number 90. Welcome to all our people. I've got 3 or 4. I'm not sure how many stories are going to be in this one. I'm about to start reading them, but they're all really good. The stories I picked out for this one are really good. So hang on. We're fitting to go for a ride. All right, here we go. Here's an email from Tim, and here's what Tim writes. The following is a true story. It happened to me, so this is a first-hand account. I grew up in the hills of East Tennessee, and this event took place in 1978. I lived in a subdivision called Southern Heights. Back then, there were not as many homes in the subdivision as there are today. The area was surrounded by wooded areas and had lots of underbrush. The wooded areas weren't very big, so I imagined the creature that I saw was only passing through. When I was about 10 years old, my family was going about our nightly routine as we always did on a school night. My brothers and I took our baths and brushed our teeth, and then we were off to bed. My oldest brother and me shared a small bedroom, and we slept in a bunk bed. The bed sat beside the only window that was in our room. My brother always made me take the top bunk, but this would be the last night that I would ever sleep on the top. This night I couldn't get to sleep, so I decided to open the curtain on the window to gaze out at the stars. But the stars are not what I saw. Staring me straight in the face was a creature only in a child's nightmare. I was petrified. Only a thin piece of glass separated us. Its eyes were dark and huge. It scared me so bad that my automatic response was to jump back, and in doing so I found myself falling from the top bunk. When I landed, it was on my left knee. I had shattered my left kneecap without knowing it at the time because I was still afraid and in shock at what I had just seen. Yet I told no one. At the time, I had no idea what I had seen. I knew nothing of Bigfoot at the time, so I had nothing to compare it to. 30 years later, after watching a TV show, I realized what I had seen. It was Bigfoot, without a doubt. I only saw this creature from the chest up, but let me tell you about what I did see. First of all, I believe that this Bigfoot was a juvenile because of his height. I estimate that he was around 5 feet or so tall. It had dark brown hair and eyes. The hair was just a few inches long. The eyes were spaced much farther apart than a human's, and they were deep set into his almost human-looking face. The skin appeared black, what little I could see, and the nose was wide and flat. The lips were dark and full. Now that I look back, the creature only appeared to be curious and maybe harmless. I have only shared this story a few times, and I hadn't shared it at all until a few years ago, but I wanted to share it with you. And maybe you would want to share it on your channel. My name is Tim, and I don't mind you sharing my name if you want to. I would also like to invite you to an event coming up in Gatlinburg, Tennessee on July 27th. It's the Great Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Conference. You should read up on it. This will be my first Bigfoot event, and I'm so excited. I can't wait to hear what everyone has to say and share. Thank you for taking the time to read my story. If you have any questions, feel free and email me anytime. Signed, Tim. Well, this email is the July 27th Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Conference was July of last year, because this email is a year old. And I'm kind of curious how Tim enjoyed it. So send me an email, Tim. Let me know how you enjoyed that conference. Sounds like it was a fun. You know, I've never been to a Bigfoot conference ever. Not one time. I'd like to go. I'd like to see what they're all about. I never have time. I'm always working. But this was a great story, Tim. Thanks for sending it. I know we all enjoyed it. Here's an email from a man in Hickman County, Tennessee. Hickman County is in Middle Tennessee, over towards Nashville. He doesn't want me to tell you his name. He doesn't want me to tell you. I don't know why I said that. He don't want me to tell you his name, but he does want me to tell you his email, so I'm going to tell it to you. All right, here's his email. Here's what he writes. After searching for answers over the past 15 years, I'm glad to have finally found your YouTube channel. I've listened to numerous stories that you've read, and several seem to have similarities to my story. I feel like my encounter has been more of a curse than a blessing, and I struggle with it. I was 16 years old at the time, and my brother was 18. My encounter terrified me, and I think about it every time I walk out into the woods. It all started about 15 years ago on our family's 300-acre farm with the weird marks on our family dog after accidentally being locked out of the garage all night. The marks that were on her back looked as if something had grabbed her by the skin on her back and squeezed her. The marks were in the shape of a hand, and on one side she had one hole, and the other side she had three. It was very strange, but we chalked it up to some type of a predator. One morning, a few days after the dog attack, we noticed that the fence around the chicken pen was bent down. The fence is 8 foot tall, and it was bent down about 4 feet from the top, and it looked as if something had bent it down to step over it. 3 chickens were missing. We have had the occasional raccoon and other nuisance animals take chickens before, but we were almost always left with a messy carcass. My dad, myself, and my brother couldn't figure out what had done this or how it had happened. My brother and I decided that we were going to camp outside that night about 50 yards from the chicken pen with the hopes of possibly catching a coyote or raccoon trying to get in. We were woken up at 3 a.m. by squeals from the pig pen about 200 yards away from us. We scrambled to get on our boots and grabbed our rifles in the spotlight, and we ran down there, only to find the hogs all huddled and grunting hard as if something had just chased them. The next morning, my dad went out to do his morning routine of feeding the animals, and he informed us at breakfast that a hog must have gotten out of the pen. We told him that we had heard them squealing the night before and that we had checked it out, but we didn't see any reason to count the pigs. He inspected the fence that morning and couldn't find any holes or where it could have gotten out. Again, we were left confused. Another animal gone without a trace. So my brother and I decided to camp out there for the next few nights to see what or who was causing this trouble. The first night, everything was peaceful. The second night, we were awakened to the sound of heavy breathing outside our tent. We grabbed our rifles, threw on our boots, and we scrambled out of the tent in hopes of shooting this nuisance animal, only to find nothing. We walked around the fence line of our back field with a flashlight and our guns, and we still couldn't find anything. It took us about 30 minutes to walk the fence line and get back to where our tent was, only to find that the tent had been torn down. This sent a chill down my spine, and I'm sure my brother's as well. This was too much for a couple of fearless teenagers, so we ran as fast as we could to the house, and we woke our dad up, and I'm sure the rest of the house, to tell him what had happened. That night, I remember sleeping with my bedroom light on. The next morning, the three of us went out to where our tent was, and we found large footprints, which I would say are about 16 inches long. I remember my dad saying to himself, "No freaking way." I've heard stories of Bigfoot, but always dismissed them as a myth like the Loch Ness Monster. My dad told us not to talk about these events to anyone, and don't tell your sisters either, he said, because they would be scared to come out of the house. The three of us walked down the game trail not too far from where our tent was, and that was a big mistake. We followed a game trail to the back portion of our property. We started down a ravine, and about halfway down, I got hit with a small rock on my right arm. I looked back to ask my brother if he had thrown it, only to find him frozen, staring in the direction that I thought the rock had come from. He yelled to my dad, "Do you see that thing?" I turned and saw it. It was standing behind a stump just up the hill. We all got a good look at it. It had very long arms and was about 3 feet wide from shoulder to shoulder. The head was round, and it looked like it had breasts. I think it was maybe 8 foot tall. The thing slowly backed up and out of sight. We quickly made our way through the ravine and were about 75 yards away from the wood line when we heard the sound of something coming our way really fast. I was able to catch a glimpse of it running at us. It was running on all four limbs and it was going really fast. It stopped a short distance away and it never ran all the way up to us. We were able to get out of the woods and into the old farm truck and headed back towards the house really quick and safely. We've not had a problem since that day, and my parents still live on the farm. My dad is sure to carry his pistol anytime he has to go out to the woods. We still hunt those woods, but we no longer go out during the night or early morning. Occasionally during the hunting season, I'll hear a faint whistle or the sound of a branch being snapped, and I will yell out, "It's okay, it's your turn to hunt," and I'll head back to the house. I feel like I can tell when it's present because all the other wildlife vanishes. We never talk about this story when we're all together, and we still have never mentioned it to our sisters. If you use this story, I would like to stay anonymous if possible. Yes, sir, that's possible. Thank you for your time, and I really appreciate your YouTube channel. It has really helped with giving me closure to know that this is something that has happened to other people and not just us. Yeah, man, this happens apparently to a lot of people. It sounds like you had a bluff charge. It sounds like that thing was charging you through the woods. And if that's the case, you're in the like upper percentile of people that have encounters. It's like people just kind of see them from their car, or they hear sounds, or they smell smells, or you actually had one charging you, and that rarely happens. Or if it does happen a lot, people don't see it. Anyway, I thought it was a fantastic story. I really appreciate you sending it, man. Here's an email from Paul, and here's what Paul writes. He says, I'm 51 years old now, and I don't care what anybody thinks about me. You may definitely use my name in this story. And he tells me that I can use his name. I don't give out last names because I don't know. It doesn't feel good doing that. Now I'm going to tell you his email. I'm going to tell it to you. I'm going to tell it to you. So sit back and here we go. This is a great story. All right, I'll shut up. Here we go. The year was 1974 or 75, and I was 6 or 7 years old. I know most people don't remember things that happened that far back, but thanks to brain surgery, many memories have come flooding back to me. Most of those memories have been verified by older family members. This event happened in East Texas in what was then the small town called Livingston. It's now a small city with a population of 5,500. My aunt and uncle decided to try their hand at the farm life. Livingston is set right at the easternmost part of the Sam Houston National Forest, right next to the Lone Star Trail, about 70 miles northeast from its much bigger neighbor of Houston, which is where this family was from. My aunt had family in Livingston, so they bought 10 acres outside the town with an old 2-bedroom pier and beam house. The land was surrounded by the Big Thicket Forest, which stretches to the east coast. We lived in Conroe, about 40 miles away. My parents decided that they would take my sister and I up to Livingston to stay for a weekend of true country living. My aunt and uncle had chickens, goats, and pigs, and my aunt's family had cows that they grazed on some land close by. It was Saturday morning, and from what I remember, the women, my aunt and my mom, had loaded up and headed into town. They were going grocery shopping and planned to hit a couple of farmer stands that sold fresh vegetables along the way. They left the kids behind with the men. The men were keeping busy outside working on my uncle's truck. My dad and his uncle were from Washington State, and they had been raised on a farm, so this was fun for them. They had been working in the city for the last years and been gone from the farm life for quite some time. That morning, we kids were inside playing and watching good old Saturday morning cartoons. We were being loud and having a blast. One of my cousins had to get up and go to the restroom. Soon after, we heard screaming from the hallway bathroom. It was my little cousin. She was screaming that a bear had looked into the bathroom window at her. I went flying into the bathroom to take a look at this bear. I was fearless and excited, but when I got there, I didn't see anything. I was just a kid and I couldn't see out the window, so I climbed on the toilet to get a better view, and that's when I saw it. I was not looking at a bear. No, it was a huge, hair-covered woman. She moved away from the side of the house and was getting ready to enter the tree line, which was a short distance from the house. I poked my head out to see better, and when I did, she stopped and turned towards me just at the edge of the woods. She turned at the waist, not just her head, and that is how I knew that it was a woman, because I could clearly see breasts. She was covered in black hair, not like a bear, because you could see her skin underneath. As I looked her up and down and then back at her face, she smiled. In the eyes of a 6-year-old kid, it seemed like a smile. Her lips curled up, and I swear she was smiling. And the thing that stuck with me was that she had the saddest eyes I had ever seen. The men came running into the house when they heard the girl scream. I was so enthralled with the sight of this creature, I didn't even hear them run inside. My father asked me what I saw as he stuffed himself into the window beside me. I had turned away to look at him as he came into the room just for a second, and when I turned back, the creature was gone. My dad asked me if I had seen a bear, and I told him, "No, Dad, it wasn't a bear." He said, "But it was looking in the window, right?" I went on to tell my father that it was a big hairy woman. "Dad, she had boobs." After trying to find it looking through the window, I remember him running out of the bathroom and meeting my uncle in the living room. They went to my uncle's room and came out with shotguns, and they told us kids to stay inside the house. We watched them through the windows as they circled the house and then stood in the yard talking for a few minutes. My father came back inside and took me back into the bathroom, and he shut the door. And he asked, was I sure that it wasn't a bear? And I told him, "Dad, it was not a bear. It was a big hairy woman." He thought it through for a minute, and then he told me that we were going to say that this was a bear because we didn't want to scare the girls any more than necessary. Throughout that weekend, we heard screaming and howling from those woods during the night. To me, it was exciting. I wasn't scared. I was a fearless 7-year-old boy, and the whole experience was fantastic to me. My father and uncle said the screams were from a cougar or a wildcat in heat. We didn't question that at all. If those men said it, we believed it. We went ahead and left Sunday night, and that was the end of my exciting weekend in the country. Later in life, I would learn that my dad and uncle were from Washington State. They hunted around Mount St. Helens and camped around the notorious Spirit Lake. They had experienced the nights of howls and screaming from the other side of Spirit Lake. My dad knew what this thing was. A few months after this event, my uncle landed a good job in Houston, and they moved away. In 2016, I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in the frontal lobe of my brain. This is the area of the brain that controls memories and your subconscious thoughts. Later that year, doctors removed a tumor that had been causing blackouts and loss of memory. My memory slowly began to come back to me. In 2018, I was having breakfast with my mother and my sister in my mother's kitchen. In the conversation, the topic of my uncle's farm came up, and a flood of wonderful memories came back to me. We laughed and talked about all the fun we had there, and I asked if they remembered the bear incident. My mother said she remembered the event, but she had not been there, so she had not thought about it in years. My sister couldn't remember anything about the farm at all. She had been too young at the time to even know what was going on. The thoughts and memories ran through my mind quickly, and then I could see myself leaning out of that window, and the image of that huge creature flashed before my eyes. I was a bit shocked and actually felt dizzy. I made a promise to my father then not to say anything about what I had seen, and I kept that promise. I never even mentioned it at the breakfast table that morning. My father passed away 14 years ago. My mother loves to hear any memories that we have about him. Oh, how she loved that man. When the subject of my father comes up, she gets so happy and she listens intently. So months later, after the breakfast, when the memories came back to me, I decided to tell my mother about the secret. After I finished telling her story, I expected her to look at me like I was crazy, but she was crying. My family knows that I have always been obsessed with Bigfoot. That is how they describe it, at least. I can't ever remember not believing that Bigfoot is out there. And so my mom told me that it explains everything. My obsession, my belief in something that is not supposed to exist. Regarding the promise that I made to my father, my mother says that it is exactly what he would do. He was so protective over the women in our family, and he knew there was no need to scare us. That is how my father was. He was a very good man. Thank you for hearing me out and letting me relive this experience. So many memories have returned that I had either suppressed or forgotten since the removal of the tumor, and this memory is one of my favorites. And he signs off, Paul. Paul, that was, man, you guys have some of the most awesome stories. It just blows me away, constantly blows me away at the great stories that people send. And this story had it kind of touched me a little bit. My dad died back in, 2004. And my mother's still living, and she misses him so much. And she's the same way. She loves, whenever we start talking about Dad, she perks up and she listens and she loves to hear stories about him. So I kind of know exactly what he's talking about here. But anyway, I don't want to ruin the whole story by me continuing to talk here, other than to say it was a great story and I just loved it. Paul, thank you very much. I've had it for a long time, just now getting to it. Thanks, Paul. All right, that's going to wind Marathon 90 up. Thank you all for listening. I really appreciate you. And we'll see you guys on the next video. Hope y'all have a great week. Thanks.